Welcome everybody to this final plenary session of the Open Science Meeting, the fourth Open Science Meeting in Bern. It's a final plenary where we will basically do two things. The first is looking back with different people from a few different perspectives on the contents, on some of the insights. The second half will be about awards and thanks. And I'm really happy that I have somebody who will chair the first part of this content-wise session, and it's Patrick Meyfroidt, who chaired the Science Committee, and I'll hand over directly to you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we're all tired, so we'll try to be efficient and to the point, but still a little bit of science. So we are very lucky that we are a relatively young community, so I don't remember exactly whom, but somewhere there was in one of the slides, there was the famous quote about standing on the shoulders of giants. And the thing is that we're really very lucky that we don't have to look at history books or whatever to find these giants. They are in the room right here. Some of the pioneers of this community. So we invited two of the past chairs of GLP and the predecessor of GLP, the LUC program, to give us a little bit their own thoughts about the conference, how it went, what they saw, what they heard, and what they think of all that. So I will first invite Eric Lambin.
Okay, I think we're all getting very close to that overdose point, so I will be very short. I was really instructed not to thank anyone, not to congratulate anyone, just to talk about the science, and yet I think my first point would be that I've been incredibly impressed by the quality of the talks and also the quality of the conversation we've had over the last 3 days. If I reflect 15 years or 10 years ago, the main divide in this community would have been between the biophysical science and the social science, and I didn't see that at all, which really shows that we've really integrated fully interdisciplinary methods in the way we function. Now, the kind of divide I've seen is more between the kind of top-down, global scale research, then downscaling with the people who really start from the people on the ground and try to upscale. I think that was the kind of debate we had, but again, a very constructive and intelligent debate. In terms of the themes that have been observed as being the research frontier, some new exciting topics, of course, we all went to just a few sessions, but I was quite interested and impressed by the challenges that are posed by this research on illicit activities, how new illicit activities are changing land use. That's a very interesting, important point, but quite difficult to study. I was also very interested by some session and discussion on the issue of culture, how culture influences land use decisions, how the motivation by actors influence land use decisions. These are some of the points. What else? Quite a number. Let me look at my note here. Yes, the role of private actors, the role of private companies. I've heard both some critical approach to that, which is really required, but also a lot of sessions that were quite hopeful that these private sector commitments could really be a game changer if they are really channeled by civil society, academics, but also government policies. So I think these are the main themes that I've really noted as being quite new, interesting. Also, of course, this enormous leap we've done in the way we harness technologies, new technologies, in order to increase transparency in supply chains and the way we monitor land. Let me also highlight a few points that I was missing or that were not present in this conference, or maybe not in a big way. Of course, I was not in all the sessions. I would say a few years ago, we would have seen quite a number of sessions on grasslands and drylands. Probably 15 years ago, it would have been 50-50 between grasslands, drylands, and forest. I've seen very, very few sessions on drylands. And of course, the risk is that we focus most of our attention on the ecosystems where we have a lot of data, where it's very easy to monitor. Very easy to monitor forest, non-forest, very, very hard to measure dryland degradation. So I think that's certainly a point of attention. Very, very little engagement with soil science. We seem to assume from this conference that the major carbon stock, the major way to store atmospheric carbon in land is on forest and vegetation. What about soil? Soils have a huge potential to actually sequester some atmospheric carbon through agricultural practices, and I've not seen a lot of that discussion, at least again in these sessions that I did attend. Also, as we venture into some new fields, we get better at land use governance, at integrating indigenous viewpoints. We tend to forget that entire social science disciplines who have been doing that for 30, 50 years. I think we need now to engage more with anthropology, with sociology, with political science, these disciplines that are really quite central in a lot of these new territories that we try to occupy. So I think that's it. That's what I want to say. Of course, as a researcher, we're always looking for the kind of radically new ideas. And as I've said, I've listened to incredible talks, but I don't come away with a completely new idea that will keep me awake for the next few weeks. And that's fine. You don't come with a completely new idea every year, every 3 years. But I think as a researcher, we should always strive to say, okay, what's the big new idea that we are going to come up with that's going to change the way we think about the land use system? Thank you very much.
Thanks. And now we can listen to Peter Verburg.
Thank you very much. And I got similar instructions as Eric, not to compliment the organization or to praise our wonderful community. And I will just do the other way around by saying that I really enjoyed this conference. And I don't think that's possible without a great organization and without a great community. But more importantly, it made me also realize why we are doing this science and what inspired me to start this kind of research. And I think that is binding a lot of us, is this feeling of willing to make a better world, to solve some of these world's sustainability problems. That is binding us. But it's also something that I've seen growing over the years in finding different ways of just responding to alarming rates of deforestation and trying to understand that, to willing to take different roles in our engagement with society and in our role as a scientist. And I think remembering what this started off this conference was this email, please read this new paper written by some members of the science committee on the normative aspects of the science. And I observed that coming back in different sessions. We had sessions different from earlier conferences, showing a bigger awareness of our role and the role we can play and the role we want to play in bringing our science to change, to transform the world. And I see in the community and in the different talks these different roles of the scientists towards society. I see we are trying to answer the questions of society, solving society problems, the scientist following society. Then I see the big push for co-design, joint learning with stakeholders, the scientist being part of the society, being a stakeholder, him or herself. And of course, we're also having a role as activists, scientists trying to lead society, taking a responsibility of using our science to be early warning for problems, to be an advocate of taking action, but also to be an inspirator of moving society towards solutions, to vision futures. We had the half-Earth debate in a few sessions, debate about what is the world that we want to live in the future. And that's a difficult question to ask people, but it's a question that's to the heart of our work. It's a very normative question, but it also determines our work. And I think I saw a lot of that in different sessions of us reflecting on our roles of scientists, reflecting on how we play our role in society. At the same time, I saw a move that the trade-offs that we are facing in our world, land being a limited resource, having so many claims on it, that we are very much aware that there's hard trade-offs between our different objectives. we have the Sustainable Development Goals that we all like as a boundary object of maybe a vision for the world that we want to live in. But we see that it's not easy to get everywhere and all of it at the same time, that there's hard decisions to make, there's values involved, and we have different value systems, different ways of maybe achieving pathways towards sustainability. And I was happy to see that from a past tendency to look for the win-win situations, the synergies, now we are also, as a community, facing the trade-offs, seeing the implications of the trade-offs, and how can we as a science community try to navigate those trade-offs or to inform society at large to decide and to make choices that maybe need to be made to stop a negative development. At the same time, in some of the talks, there was negative visions. We see that although we do great science, we are dealing with huge problems, increasing hunger. Yesterday, a report of the World Resource Institute that again, deforestation rates are peaking to high levels. There's a lot of work to be done, and our impact is not as we would like to have it. So it's also a trend that we need to continue to engage. And I think that spirit, I felt that spirit is there. Also the optimism that as humans we are able to do a lot and to make a lot of change. And I think that's, for me, very much the binding thing, and also for me, the motivation I got out of a lot of the sessions is that we are able to do a lot. And the diversity of our different normative stands and the different viewpoints, that's our strength, because we avoid dogmatic views on how the world should develop. We are in debate, but still we also push forward to all pursue for reaching a more sustainable land use, whatever that may be. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. So now, well, yeah. So now, if you remember, we had 3 teams and questions to start with the conferences. So we have prepared a kind of summary, a synthesis of what we could get from these teams from your report. So first of all, thank you very much to all the session chairs who really made the effort to send us lots of reports. There's, of course, already 50 pages or more of reports, so much more than we can actually synthesize here. But just to remind that we hope that we can do something else about these reports, maybe later on, maybe turn some of them into blog posts on the website or something like that. So you can also still send us the reports later on if you feel that it's worthwhile, useful, and so that we can return to you also to see what we can do out of these reports. And so we will first have Navin Ramankutty, who will synthesize the first team. Well, part.
Thanks, Patrick. We had the thankless task of trying to take all the material that we got and try to synthesize it. So this is just the beginning, not the end. We'll keep trying to consult with you as we try to build the key themes that came out of this meeting. The other thing I wanted to say is that people often talk about writing talks on the plane. This talk was written over lunch. So, what are the visions for the planetary land system? Land is the nexus for addressing global challenges. I ran into Peter Messel yesterday, and he asked me, I really need to know the answer to this question, no context dependency and all of that. So here's the simple answer for you, Peter. There are multiple and competing visions for the land. That's the answer. There were a lot of questions about land for what and for whom, but we're not going to talk about that, right? We heard a lot of claims for the land for both climate and for biodiversity, and increasingly they were linked claims. So from the Eric Dinnerstein's keynote presentation, it was clear that the biodiversity people talking about half Earth are also presenting it in terms of carbon and climate. And increasingly, these are stated with urgency. The idea that if you want to remain below 1.5 degrees centigrade, land has to play a part. Or if you want to we have only 10 years to solve this problem, and so on. So the urgency is also a key message that's coming across. Several sessions saw this idea of two-way feedbacks. So there were sessions talking about the impacts of conflict on land use, but also the impact of land use on conflicts. There's an emergent theme of illicit economies and their effects on land use. Eric already touched on that. There were also sessions talking about conservation and interactions with land use. Both land use conservation itself is a major land use today. There was also another session on health and interactions with land use that I didn't manage to get into my presentation, hot off the press. And so there were also talks talking about the two-way interactions between human health and land use, and essentially pointing out that that can be a huge leverage for land use change science to have an impact. There were several sessions looking at biodiversity, and one of their key conclusions, which is slightly a sad story, is that trade-offs remain the norm, and that our holy grail of trying to find win-win situations seems to be very elusive and mainly location-specific. There are increasingly sophisticated approaches, models for analyzing trade-offs. However, and this is Rinku's however, steps for action and specific policy recommendations are still missing. There's a lot of excitement at this meeting. We had a lot of conservation scientists attending for the first time, and that land system science and conservation science should work together more closely, that conservation is a major land use, and that conservation science can actually help move land system science beyond a binary vision of what conservation means. There was a really interesting talk talking about defaunation or empty forests, where through hunting, even though the forest looks the same from above, the forest is defaunated because of hunting. On climate, research confirms that the biophysical impacts of land use are as important as the kind of emissions-related impacts on climate over the last century. However, the research shows that there's large uncertainty in the data and consequently also in the impacts. Lots of approaches, lots of new data sets. I went to several talks talking about data sets on fertilizer use or multiple cropping and so on. So clearly this community has moved beyond land cover and is looking at land management. Scenarios offer a way or an approach to engage stakeholders and to conduct impact assessments and also to influence decision making. That session seemed to have a lot of conversations around scale, but the simple message is to say that the appropriate scale really depends on the question you're asking on the scale of decision making. But you should avoid mismatch. Don't try to use global scenarios to try to make local decision making. There are increasingly more talks and more conversations about demand-side things, about interactions between supply and demand. We saw a lot of conversations and talks about demand-side research, people working on looking at things like consumption and diets, and increasingly challenges to the supply-side question. So, do we need to close yield gaps, or can we just consume less? There's also context dependency to this question: who needs to consume more, or who needs to consume less? The half-Earth debate was an interesting one. As the conversation was going on about half-Earth on Slido, the questions that we kept saying was, how about half consumption, right? Why do we need to have half-Earth? And then there's an observation that, on the supply side, land system science should be thinking about some of these new emerging technologies and anticipating them. Whether we like it or not, some of these things are going to be there, like CRISPR, precision agriculture, and so on. And we aren't poised yet to investigate the implications of these new emerging technologies. On the broader context, when normativity meets science, a lot of fun happens. So if people were at the half-Earth debate, that was really lively, and that's all I have to say about that. And then there were a lot of conversations I felt, including the panel discussion of the opening plenaries, of a conversation about the world as it is versus the world as it could be. And that's how the community, I felt, was divided in their opinions. So what next? There was a question about whether land system science should engage with half-Earth. One of the members in that discussion said no, but we should make Half-Earth engage with us, because we have a lot to offer, right? So I think engagement is two ways. We should engage with them, but I think I don't know if Eric is in the audience, but hopefully being in this meeting also informed him a lot about how the land system science community can offer new approaches and new ways of thinking about Half-Earth. A summary of one of the keynotes from this morning was that we can't have it all. The trade-offs remain the norm. But as I was writing this, one of my colleagues walked by me and said, yes, we can have it all. So I'm proposing that this could be the theme of the next OSM conference. Can we have it all? There was also another plenary where we were talking about we need to have a global understanding, but maybe we can do this from the bottom up, that case studies are more important than ever, and we have to think even more about where these case studies need to be conducted. Right now, it's quite haphazard. We pick the nicest places on the planet or places we are from or places that we like visiting, but maybe we need to be a little bit more systematic about where these case studies need to be located. And finally, that while these kind of global demands on land are placed on people, we need to think about ways in which we can empower people to have more agency. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison, Thomson for the second team.
Great, thank you. All right, so I have the challenge of theme 2. There we go. Starting back here. So the question for theme 2 is what do people want from land, navigating trade-offs and fostering synergies in land systems? And we asked for a lot of things within this theme, right? It's pretty broad, but really commonly looking at what are the global challenges that we're talking about within this space, and then what are the narratives that are local and global systems are in with responding to these global challenges, and how do people fit in that picture and their needs, and how are those being met? And it's kind of an odd question for a conference theme, so I thought I'd start with, was this actually the right question to ask? And I think from the standpoint of we had some really excellent sessions. I sat in on a lot of them, but there were many, of course, that I couldn't. But everything, all the sessions that I heard, all the talks that I heard were really very thoughtful, and really a lot of integrative types of research that I was not familiar with that were going on, things that are not in my field at all, but really all very interesting and informative, and an emerging picture of this is a very dynamic and changing space. It requires a broad range of approaches that seem to be coming to bear. I think this theme, I think, is building somewhat unintentionally off of what Peter was just talking about with his summary of where we've come from. And, taking this one step further there, I just tried to think about why did we ask this question this way? I don't think we thought about it so much at the time, but thinking about it now, it's that, in talking with all of you and being here over the last few days, land system scientists are not studying people per se necessarily. Sometimes maybe they are, but not necessarily. But your work by necessity takes you into communities of these people, whether that's at a local, regional, national level. You start to understand the challenges. You have to understand their world, where they're coming from, and develop a kind of an interest in seeing that your work is helpful to them as they're trying to respond to these global challenges that your research is also targeting. So I think it becomes that type of imperative. So what did we learn through the last 3 days through this session? People want many things, right? Many different people want different things. One common theme that I heard a lot was new actors, right? So you can't just look at who the traditional actors are who have been there, but you have to look at who's coming into the system. A lot happening in terms of investment in land internationally. Corporate social responsibility came up a number of times, what NGOs are doing, as well as emerging stakeholders. We had a great talk this morning about narco-traffickers in Central American forests, right? So they're a stakeholder. How do you handle that? That's a new pressure on the system. And we've heard some themes around, people who are making some of the decisions in the background, regulations or policies around this don't necessarily take into account what people want. Maybe they don't know to, or they just decide not to. So the research is also reflective of that, and looking at to what extent that type of decision making also is influencing what's happening on the land. Another common theme that I think Tanya Lee set the stage for right at the very beginning was that these narratives, you have to challenge the narratives that are out there. Right? We have narratives around how land use changes, how people migrate, how as incomes rise, and so on, as populations move and land use changes and all of that. But you have to challenge those because it's not the same everywhere. And if you start looking in detail with new actors, but also just in different situational contexts, those narratives are not static. And the environmental change narrative is also, I think, not static, and we're seeing that now more with climate change. Even if you're looking at the environment base or the climate context of a community, that is also changing. So there's just a lot of dynamism in that, and really just challenging the narratives. And I heard that sort of as a common theme through a number of sessions, explicitly and implicitly in what people were saying. And then sort of how are we learning about what it is that people want? Really, there's a lot of discussion around considering history. I heard a number of talks looking, finding new methods to look backwards to understand what has actually happened over time. We think we know, but then you maybe get a new set of satellite information, or from spy satellites, or you gain new resources in the historical archives, and you find out that what you thought had happened was very different. And so I see work happening in there to really understand where people are coming from, what history has led to now. And also some discussion around anticipation of what they want in the future. So you have to look at societies, not just how they're currently using land, but how they want to be using land, what they think, what their vision is for their community in the future, in addition to what it currently is. And then commonly, sustainability can be very broad and can mean many things. We tend to focus, I think, in this community a lot on sustainability being environmental sustainability, which is, of course, key. But also, I heard a lot here around bringing in issues of fairness, equity, justice, conservation, democratic process, livelihoods, sustainability in all of those contexts as being equally important to the environmental sustainability. And then one other topic that I heard in a couple of sessions, but there was a really good innovative session on this as well, on some of the key factors like culture, somewhat intangible, and modeling approaches being incredibly valuable to understanding land use change and what potential futures are. But there are some these key factors that are it's difficult to handle in that kind of context, and no one's really bridged that gap, but I think people are actually starting to talk about it more and come together and think about what are the solutions to try and represent some of these factors in the model so that you can get a better idea of how that might be responding. And so finally, where do we go from here? So just a few points. Continue challenging existing narratives, so keep doing what people are doing, and building understanding based on the complex, on-the-ground realities, rather than what we think the narrative might be, but actually going and working to understand what's really happening. And then, obviously, understanding trade-offs and looking for synergies, those are both equally important, and try and meet multiple needs in a just and sustainable manner. We may not have an idealized land system that we've identified, but can you find optimal ones for certain locations? And then, again, from the session this morning, it came up, I think Sharad Lele was talking about, we have to publish papers. That doesn't necessarily change the world, right? So in addition to publishing papers, also reaching out, engaging stakeholders, civil society allies who are working on these things, who can take your research into the sphere of action. So being willing to do that and go outside the comfort zone. And so leaving with the quote from Kendra this morning, the only mistake is not to try doing this. So take your science, go find the allies, see what they think, give them a call, and see where it can go from there. So there we go.
Thanks. Thank you. Now Darla for the third team.
Okay, thanks to everyone who submitted to this theme, and again to the chairs that ran these sessions. So one of the things when we were putting this conference idea together back last year when we were in Ethiopia, we were talking about how in prior iterations of this meeting, there had been these groupings of, say, globalization, institutions, and kind of the the guts of what we do, the measuring and the modeling. And we said, well, how about we take all of these things and put them together and really shake them up, right? So kind of find these cross-cutting threads in what we do and how we do it, and kind of use that to advance some goals, so transforming land systems into things that maybe are better for people and for the environment. So this was a great experiment. And I know there were a lot of people maybe thinking about how to recast what they did to fit in these sort of new parsings in our themes 1, 2, and 3. But it was really wonderful, and I enjoyed it. So, okay. So first off, this is a really, really quick and dirty word cloud that I made of all the notes that people sent that they took. So there are a lot of things on here that you see over and over again, right? But so ecosystem services, biodiversity. Yeah, now I'm squinting because I can't see the screen from here. But anyway, so I won't go into greater detail there. But it was interesting. So how some of the same words came up, but some new ones and some new kind of bridging interdisciplinary areas like health and water and ecosystems were so present. So some things that I noticed, these are just lists. They're not to be read across or anything. But so the topics here on the left were kind of the domains, application domains that people are working, right? So some old, some new. So disease being a theme that we're realizing, as Navin mentioned, the sort of two-way interactions, and that's really sort of critical for social and environmental systems. Increasingly feeling comfortable with co-production, right? So we've been talking about co-production for a while, but it seems like there's a tipping point maybe where the community is really starting to embrace it. One of the issues that came up in an afternoon session was, again, that it requires some long-term investment, right? It requires long-term investment of time. It requires long-term investments in place and long-term investments in people. And so finding ways as a community that we can support each other in doing that. Some challenges of timescales, as Allison mentioned, right, that if we as a community started when satellites were launched, that's what, 40, 50 years of data, 80 years of data, perhaps, if you include area photographs. But can we move back in time and move sort of forward in time to really get timescales that kind of matter? I just mentioned a few here. Eric mentioned some others, but sort of new scientific domains or other types of transdisciplinary knowledge. So some things that I heard really highlighted was drawing from psychology, drawing from philosophy, drawing from business. So maybe the people and pixels domain of environmental science and anthropology and economics and geography. Now we're bridging even farther and kind of realizing as a community that other scholars out there have knowledge that we need, and so let's sort of bring them under our sort of big tent. And then some old concepts, so new ideas on old concepts. So what are frontiers? What are frontiers in a globalized world, right? So it's a very sort of productive area to think about. So, and then finally, just to get to my next slide, on the end there, I put policy in quotation marks, because again, another really strong theme that I think came out of these sessions was that sort of policy governance institutions, right? These can encompass a really broad array of factors, and many factors that we don't necessarily think about. So norms, civil society, social media. So there are aspects of governance, right, that far transcend what we think about as kind of the normal policy purview or the normal policy actors. So finally, kind of how do we support transformation? What came out of kind of throwing all this stuff in one big pot? So first of all, a theme that came up over and over is, so we as a community, like any community, we're chasing shiny new tools and data sets. And, from drones to blockchains to what have you. And when we do that, right, there's, of course, a proliferation of challenges. And so we kind of tackle that head on, but have to bring with it sort of careful practice, careful conceptualization, as well as some good kind of reflexive science. The new disciplinary domains I already went over. And then there were some critical reflections on some common assumptions, right? So if we think kind of capitalist firms being bad or smallholders being good, and realizing some of the complexity of these relationships when you kind of dig down into what people are doing then and its impact on land systems. Putting governing and researching together. So that was kind of the challenge of this theme. And it will be interesting to see what that kind of leads to, whether it's both actually kind of informing policy and working with stakeholders together, and what that's going to mean for how we do research and how we teach. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we will have a few more words from our co-chair, Rinku, to talk a bit more and reflect a little bit more about the relation between the science that we do and that we have done in this conference and presented, and the policy domain, the interface with the normative aspects of, well, why we are doing that and how we do it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I may not follow that script exactly, but we'll see where we go. So I wanted to basically start with reflecting again back and looking forward. Essentially from the inception of LUC, the Land Use Land Cover Change Program, we've always had a move away from just the monitoring of land change to really thinking about the drivers and impacts of land change, and increasingly to the feedbacks, right, closing the loop. In the new iteration, we find ourselves mulling a move from thinking about the science of land change or land system science to really thinking about a science of sustainability of land systems. And now, increasingly, thinking about science for sustainability, as also highlighted. Oh, I thought I had 10 minutes too. Okay, all right, well, speeding up. So thank you. So we are explicitly actually addressing a lot of the normative dimensions, or at least trying to do so. And I wanted to kind of, throw up a couple of graphics that help at least me and some other folks think about some of the assumptions in the work that we do, assumptions in our conceptual models, also assumptions in terms of implications of normativity. And the first has to really do with whether or not we're targeting generality in our conceptual models of land systems, or realism, or precision. And oftentimes, we really have to trade off amongst those objectives of land systems models. We can also think about whether or not we're engaging more from a theoretical standpoint with land system science dynamics, or whether we're prioritizing participatory goals here. And again, being much more explicit about those different dimensions, I think, is the first step towards embracing policy relevance or normative science. So I am not sure how much of this I'm going to be able to cover, but I wanted to reflect from the series of sessions over the last couple of days in terms of some of the innovative and novel insights we're seeing emerge in terms of drivers and dynamics, in terms of the kinds of engagements and collaborations that we're seeing happen in our community, in terms of the sorts of partnerships and stakeholder collaborations that we're seeing happen. And finally, I wanted to end on a note on the quality of our community. So maybe I'll focus on the last one most. So I'm not going to list all of these, but suffice it to say that, as some of the other speakers also pointed out, and our theme leads also pointed out, we've had a lot of really interesting new objects and subjects of analysis emerge over the last 3 days, and it has been a really inspiring set of sessions and conversations between sessions as well that highlight underrepresented actors in land system science and change, the role of global production networks, and so on, telecoupling at multiple scales, including the heterogeneity of actors implicated in telecoupling, and the role of land tenure systems and tenure regimes and change in creating new conditions for land conflict and land change. In terms of critical engagement with feedbacks and with policy, again, just a couple of things. We have much more focus on massive global scale interventions, such as the land degradation neutrality targets, zero deforestation commitments, and so on. So we as a community certainly are taking those kinds of topics on. There's a lot of emphasis as well in terms of really focusing on the politics of land systems. And there were a lot of really fertile and provocative conversations over the last 3 days in terms of, kind of the emergence of new ruralities, the tensions between globalization on the one hand and hardening national boundaries on the other, and what does that mean for land systems change, and I'm going to skip over the rest on that list. And just a couple of words also on sort of methodological and collaborative sorts of novelties or innovations. There's a lot of, we have a lot of continuity with the sorts of methods we've always used in our community, the integration and the interdisciplinarity of the flavor of our work. But we also see a lot of emphasis on scenarios and decision support tools, on sort of innovations in machine learning to better highlight spatially and temporally complex land uses and land cover. A lot of emphasis on big data, of course, and both remote sensing and social sensing in terms of big data. Again, a lot of synthesis and meta-analysis, which is oftentimes a sign of a maturing science, right? We're not just doing our site-specific work alone. We're still doing it. We all are passionate about it, but also actually bridging out, upwards and outwards. I want to end on just a few reflections on the quality of our community. I think every single one of us is a member of multiple networks, disciplinarily and otherwise, and I have found the last 3 days to be incredibly rich and incredibly inspiring, not just by virtue of the kind of interdisciplinary work that we do, but the fact that we do it with sort of a welcoming and philosophically open spirit, for the most part. At least that is my perception. And this really has been, quite an incredible journey over the last, 20, 30 years or so, without sort of the hardening of turf. I don't think within our community we are yet quite fighting the sorts of turf battles that other interdisciplinary communities oftentimes find themselves fighting. So I find that remarkably inspiring. I also want to reflect on some of the cross-cutting conversations across the sessions that have engaged directly or indirectly with questions of normativity and the science policy interface. And there were some interesting suggestions, of course, of necessary suggestions, and we're focusing on the flows of benefits, distributional and procedural justice questions, but also how to really not just think about normative questions in our research, but also in our pedagogy. How do we prepare future generations for normative land system science? I wanted to highlight one of the sessions that I attended yesterday, which invited a new type of stakeholder, right, into our conference, into our community, and a couple of reflections from those stakeholders, which were industry stakeholders, right? So they were asked as part of the session that I attended, the panel session, what were the knowledge gaps that they had that they wanted, perhaps, the land system science community to contribute to. One of the panelists pointed out that the industry is already aware of a lot of our scientific knowledge around the what questions, but they really wanted and needed guidance from us as a community on the how do we do it questions. So for instance, and I'm sort of paraphrasing them, but I tried to be as accurate as I could in terms of what they said, but their top on the wish list was that land system science researchers would contribute their best efforts to investigate and test the best configurations of forest biodiversity and people's livelihoods for stable and sustainable landscapes. On the other hand, another panelist pointed out that we also needed to be mindful about the main motivator in the private sector, which is competition. Just one last point, and I'm paraphrasing one of the attendees in the conference called Zimmerer, who commented on the fact that we as a community need to engage with our scientific methods in an instrumental way, meaning really apply them and practice them, but also be self-critical about them. And I think as a community, so far, we managed to do both. And thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Rinku. I'm sorry I had to constrain you a little bit. But so at some point, Pete really insisted that I make the synthesis of the synthesis of the synthesis, which not only we don't have the time, but it would be even more trivial than the answer. So I just wanted to show one or two slides, if we still have them. No? Yep. Just going a little bit out of this science now, just to say that there was this very interesting exercise to look at where are the places where the people here in the room are actually doing research, which shows that, yes, the Global Land Program does research in many places, maybe not all the places, that's true. still there is a gap and a difference between the map of the place where people actually do research and the places where they come from. So this is something that we are working on it every day and so on, but it's something that we have to keep in mind. And on the positive side, the next slide just shows that what I've seen, so my summary of the conference is that I've seen a lot of community activities, engagement, discussions, empowerment, and so that's why I just wanted to finish with that. And with that, I will hand it over to Ariane and Pete. No, well, directly to
Graciela and
Esteban, who should be here around. Okay, thank you.
Do you want me to start?
Fast, yes, please.
All right. This is a different moment in the meeting, probably. And we are honoring now those who bring new life every time that we have a meeting, and are the students that give presentations or bring posters here. So we have awards, and I will name you. I hope you're here. If not, we will still make an applause for you. So, Karina Winkler.
And they can come up?
Please. Yeah. Karina comes from KIT in Germany, and her work has to do with linking with data, land management, and land use. Congratulations. Next awardee, Si-Yu Kim. Si-Yu is doing her studies in Humboldt University in Berlin, and her work has to do with land competition and its effect on protected areas. Congratulations. Next awardee, Bini, I don't know if it's pronounced in Italian in the US or if it is pronounced as Americans. Bini Ricciardi, where are you? Well, he's not here. Bini has shown us how the farm size influences things that are as important as yield and diversity. Thanks. And now we have Sven Voss. Are you here? Sven works in ETH in Zurich, and he has been working on participatory research with farmers. Congratulations. And Ronnie Meyer, are you here? Yes, great. Ronnie is also from ETH in Zurich, and Ronnie has been working on how forests buffer daily temperatures with a heat storage capacity. Amazing work. Thanks. Our last awardee, Ana Laura Reboredo. Are you here? She's probably not here. Oh, she is. Great. Ana Laura works in Boston University, and her work has to do with the impact of land tenure on clarification and conservation. Congratulations. Okay.
Yes. Well, and now we move to the awards for best posters. Again, we have 2 awards per each of the categories. And before I forget, I'd like to thank all the colleagues that help us in the judging of these posters. So it was really a hard work to decide among the best. In one of the categories, Cecile Marie Gaud, if she's around, Cecile, for her work on global rangeland systems. Global rangeland systems as threat under climate change and viability. Well done, thank you.
You're going to have to squeeze on the couch.
Yes. Next awardee is Joanna Fusco for her work on impacts of agricultural systems dynamics on Mediterranean biodiversity and large-scale spatial analysis. Are you here, Joanna? No. I think it's not here. Perrine Laroche, or Laroche, I'm not sure, for the poster on observing shift in telecouplings driven by dietary patterns in developed countries. Congratulations. Julia Rose Cuellar, for her work, Can Multifunctional Landscapes Become Effective Conservation Strategies, Challenges, and Opportunities from a Mexican Case Study. James Stephen Gerber, for the work on Hitting the Ceiling, Global Trends in Closing Yield Gaps. And the last award for the best poster is for Franziska Birgit Smith on her work on transformative potential of strategic planning, the case of Zurich, Switzerland. That's it.
Okay, great. So thanks you all. And there's three more people I just wanted to also acknowledge. The journal Land supported 2 scientists to come, to young scholars to come to the meeting based on the quality of their submissions. So I'd like to call up Catalina Montaño. Is she here? Catalina, yeah? And just because you guys need to hustle because we're behind, Beth, come on up. Come on up, yeah. Come on up, you guys. And one more award is for Maria Pique Rodriguez, who's also she was awarded a special award by ESRI. There's a blog about her and her work on the ESRI homepage. Check it out. So thanks to all 3 of you. Sorry, I'm kind of batching you now. Great. All right, so let's give a round of applause. Come on, sit down. I have chocolates for you, but come stand with them.
We have no more chocolates.
No, that's fine. And I have chocolates for you too, but I'm not going to dig them out of my bag, but I'll give them to you in a second. I also just wanted to say thanks to the 2 committees that worked so hard and went to so many sessions and made sure that we could really do a great review process. So well deserved. Thanks, and you guys can get off the stage. You're free now. So yeah, we're rounding into that part of the feel-good part of the meeting where we get to say thanks because we know that this wouldn't be possible without the work of so many hands together. And so I think we start with.
Well, we'll start with a very important group of people. It's the science committee of this open science meeting, and we would like to ask Patrick, Darla, Navin, and Allison to come up. Okay. And just to say, I don't have to be long, but these people have worked hundreds of hours, day and night, meeting on Slack at any time across the globe. They have done meta-reviews of more than 1,000 abstracts, and finally they have woven in the whole science into these 3 themes. So it was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
So we know how much the Belgians like Swiss chocolate.
Yes, it's a special pleasure.
Yes. Oh, great. Okay. Cry. Go. You don't need to sit on the couch anymore, I guess, right?
Thank you so much.
And let's see.
And also, just to add on, I think they were supported by a 22-person science committee doing reviews. They have done an incredible job. It was a lot of work, so thanks to all these people who are, most of them are here as well. Thank you.
And now I'd just like to invite a few other people up to the stage, people who have basically resisted coming to the stage, working in the scene, behind the scenes the whole time. And part of the reason why I'm all kind of disheveled right at this point is because they're not like doing everything. I have to do it all at this moment myself. So they're just to show you how important they are. First of all, I think one thing about this meeting has been so amazing is the technical support. You know, the computers all working in every room and everything being loaded perfectly and everything being set up so beautifully, and that has to do with the technical support team that's at the Center for Development and Environment. That's Emmanuel Heierli and Matthias Fries. Are you guys around? Come up, come up.
Where are they?
They're right there. I see them, and they're
We
not.
can see you.
We can see
Manuel.
you. Come up here. Come on.
Come on.
Come on. And then I just, come on. And
Matti, where are you?
And you know, we had sort of two teams. So we had the scientific team and then the local organizing team. And the local organizing team is part of the regular staff that supports me at CDE. And that is Manuel Abebe. Where's Manuel? Also a budding land system scientist, finishing his master's. Thank you so much. And you can, yeah, I know, I'm gonna, awesome. You sit down. And you made it up. Okay, and then our event organizer extraordinaire, Tamara. Where are you? This is why the Kornhauskeller was so beautiful, and every dessert was perfect, and the food was delicious, and you all got your planes on time, and oh my gosh, and it's right here. Da-da-da, the little heart. And then, so this is definitely maybe a last but not least, Brigitte Portner, who was the head of the local organizing team. Now we all have to get all kinds of things out. Yeah. So she's like an artist soul, and she's like a scientist mind, and so it's like this perfect combination of like all of the incredible efficiencies, and she wanted to know who we were, and she worked to really make a meeting that was like, that reflected us, and we couldn't have done it without you. So thanks for that. Where are we now? I lost my, there we go. Okay. Yes. And then there's another sort of layer to all of this. So the International Program Office is at the University of Bern, but it's at the Center for Development and Environment, which is a center, if people, they're fellow travelers with CDE. And so GLP wouldn't have been able to make it to Bern without the co-directors, Pete and Thomas Roy. Please come up. These people have just really, it seems like in Switzerland, money sort of just like falls from the sky, but you actually have to like shake a lot of trees to get it. And these guys like have just taken care of us and believed in the mission of GLP and made a home for us here that we so welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Things are going to get fun now, right? So, and then there's the, where's the co-chair? There she is. And so the people that kind of hold it all together, this is, I can't pronounce it in German, Ingwerer liqueur, made in Bern, for my two co-chairs, and they're going to share it with me, I'm sure, over the next couple of days, because we're going to have a big drink. Yeah, exactly. That's it.
And while we are at it, I think
Yeah,
we have to say something.
You're
There's
totally embarrass me.
been somebody, Ariane, the executive officer of the IPO, who was actually the person holding everything together. That was you. You were bringing together the science with the formats of the different sessions, with the whole organization, logistics team. It was incredible. And perhaps most importantly, you had this ambition to bring this spirit into it. I think that's thanks to you, of cordiality and friendliness. That's really your signature. And thank you very, very much for everything. And this session.
Yeah. Good.
Good?
Yeah, and so now we do. Right. And so now I'm going to turn it over to the co-chairs. You guys want to sit up there? Are you embarrassed enough at this point? Or would you like to sit down now? Okay, go ahead. Okay.
Go, you sit down.
Okay.
Okay, great. What
I'm
a
so glad I
wonderful
got you on
celebration.
stage.
So we don't want to stand between, the evening's festivities that everybody probably has planned. Just to say a couple of words, we have had an incredible 3 days of amazing conversations and convivencia. I don't really know what the word is in English for that. Just sort of living and celebrating together. And we, as the steering committee, have more work ahead of us over the next 3 to 4 days or so. And we're going to really be gathering all of our experiences, talking about them, trying to synthesize, take stock, and plan for the coming year's activities. We're going to continue, of course, all of the work that we do with our nodal offices and working groups, our existing working groups, but also we'll hopefully be encouraging and receiving applications for new working groups based on a lot of the great novel ideas that have been fostered in this meeting. And we will be in touch with all of you and look forward to the working together with the community over the next year and leading up to the next Open Science meeting in roughly 2 years or so, which is most likely to be in the Americas. We don't exactly know where yet, but we'll get there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rinku. Good. I think we have spoken enough. We are tired and exhausted. We'll be silent, but it has been said, I think we are inspired. So my final thanks go to all of you who traveled from very far and sometimes very close. And you really make this an unforgettable moment, I think, here at the University of Bern. It will stay with us. It has been really great and we're extremely happy. And recently I learned a new verb, and that verb means to Brexit. So it's basically saying goodbye without leaving. So I would say, goodbye, have safe travels and home, and thanks for all.